You're listening to The Head Trash Show with the founder of Head Trash, Alexia Leachman. Head Trash is the home to the new and unique Head Trash clearance method that removes unwanted negative thoughts, feelings and emotions quickly and effectively so that you can achieve clarity, confidence and contentment in your life. Tune in every week as Alexia shares insights and simple strategies to help you create some headspace to experience confidence and clarity in your life and business. To find out how to clear your head trash quickly and effectively using our unique method, pop over to www.headtrash.co.uk to get our free download and subscribe for our free head trash clearance updates. And now for the show.
Hello and welcome back to the Head Trash Show. This is me, your host, Alexia Leachman. Thank you so much for joining me today. Now, on today's show, it's a slightly different format in the sense that I haven't got anything specific in terms of head trash that we're going to wrestle with. But what I can promise you is life, death, birth, severe trauma, massive accident, near-death experiences, all that and more. I've got a brilliant guest on, that's why, who's been through all of that stuff and is really just going to sort of share her experience, share her insights and share her story, which is just full of such fascinating, it's just so interesting. I first came across my guest today, who's Catherine Holland, on another podcast, Ava Detko's podcast, which you'll find also on iTunes, The Holistic Path to Health. I think I've got that name right. And when I heard her interview with Catherine, I was like, I've got to get this woman on the Head Trash Show. There's so much that she's saying that I'm sure the Head Trash Show listeners would love to hear. So that's what I did. I got in touch and she was delighted to come and have a chat on the show. So that's who I've got today. Now, Catherine Holland specialises in helping people recover from trauma and really put their life back, get their life back, heal back, recover from the emotional side of it and the physical side of it, and using everything that she had learned to help people to do that. Her background before she had her horrific accident was as a breath worker doing rebirthing, and rebirthing is a really powerful technique to using the breath to reconnect that moment where you were born and to really sort of, and in the process of doing that, you end up sort of really reconciling a lot of the head trash you've got going on in that moment, and it can be a powerful healing process. So we touch on rebirthing as well during our conversation. So it's all really, really fascinating. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over the time that I spoke to Catherine Holland about life, death, and everything in between and beyond. Hello and welcome to the Head Trash Show, Catherine.
Thank you, Alexia. It's great to be here.
Now, today I can just tell we're going to have this fascinating conversation because one way that I like to think about the work that you do is that you are not only a life coach, but you're also a death coach. And before we go any further, because yes, today we're going to be talking about death, probably in some shape or form. Just tell us, Catherine, how you came to do this kind of work.
Okay, well, I've been teaching breath work for about 25 years, and it's been an incredibly valuable tool for my personal growth, spiritual growth, all that sort of progress. And it's encouraged me to look at my diet and my lifestyle and all sorts of things. But what happened in 2000 was that somebody drove their car into me and injured me so badly that I lost half my blood before the medics managed to come and put a tourniquet on it and stop me dying. And I travelled to the next world. I don't know whether you call it dying or a near-death experience or what you call it, but I experienced it fully and consciously, and I remember everything. So having had that peep into the next world and having made a deliberate and conscious choice to return, even though I knew it was going to hurt like hell, has given me a really interesting perspective, and it seems to have encouraged even more people who have issues about death which they're trying to avoid or death which they'd actually rather like to come to me.
Right, that's fascinating. Fascinating.
Sometimes it's quite conscious and open. Most of the time it's less conscious. But when it's actually conscious and open, it's an extraordinary journey to make with somebody.
Right. So now before we go into the work that you might do with people that have come to you in that way, you know, you kind of just went over so quickly your story, but I really just want to go back to it because you just, you know, so basically you were hit by a car. So were you a pedestrian or on a bike or?
I was on a bike.
Right.
I've ridden a push bike all my life and not been hit very much. And I got to the stage where I had 3 children on my tandem with me.
Wow.
Pedalled. But actually on this occasion, I was just learning to ride a motorbike. I'd got myself a little 125 and I'd had it for 6 weeks. I'd done my CBT 3 weeks previously and I was pretty nervous because unlike all the boys I know who started riding when they were 14 off-road, you know, just practicing and learning how to ride the bike, I'd never ridden a motorbike. I'd been on the back, never changed gear, I'd never used the brakes, I'd never had to balance it. So I was a bit nervous on my bike. I'd been out for the evening. I'd been into Birmingham city centre where I went climbing. And then that evening I'd also been dancing for a couple of hours as well to a band in the Fiddle and Bone. I don't drink alcohol. I'd been drinking water as I always do. And I was vegan and had been for about 15 years, I think. And I was eating half raw. So with the exercise and all of that going on, you can see that I was actually pretty peak fit.
Yeah, you sound like you were in really good shape.
Yes, I was. And I believe that all of those things are what contributed, along with the breathing that I did at the time.
Right.
When I was hit, I just connected my breath because that's what I'd been trained to do and that's what I'd been practicing. I've been doing it for, 10, 15 years maybe, until it had become second nature. And I think that's what saved my life because I realised that I was in trouble. I couldn't tell where the pain was coming from. It was so all-encompassing. I lay in the road and I drifted. I drifted is the wrong word. I started walking down a black tunnel. Okay, I started moving down a black tunnel and I was faced with the choice. Do you want to continue where there is no pain? Because that was great, the pain had gone. Or do you want to return to the pain and see your children grow up? So I took the latter choice because that was what I wanted to do. I don't know quite how these things happen. And I was aware that I didn't want to die alone. I asked somebody to hold my hand. I don't know who it was. I still don't know who it was. My eyes were closed from the point of the accident almost continuously for about 6 weeks. Long time. I didn't open them properly for about 5 days. It was too much effort. But I couldn't tell where that pain was coming from. I just didn't understand. I was frightened it would be my back because, of course, motorcyclists are famously injured in the back and then paralysed. And, of course, that was fear. I don't know when I realised that it was my leg that had been injured. I don't know quite when I took that in. But a woman came who turned out to be the passenger in the car. And she stood in her drunken stupor and said, "Oh, you're all right," which she must have been pretty drunk. I was pumping blood out. All the skin and all the muscles had been ripped off my leg. And it had been broken in about 12 places.
My goodness. And
she thought I was all right. The blood was pumping out so fast I had to put a tourniquet on me.
Goodness.
So she was drunk. Obviously, he was drunk. The first I knew, because of motorcycle helmets being full face, and of course that's the disadvantages, and any car drivers out there, please listen to this, you cannot see sideways, you have no peripheral vision.
Yeah, of course.
You do not know that somebody's driving into you until they hit you. And that's of course one of the problems you have after somebody's hit you.
Yeah.
But because of the breath work, I was able to integrate this experience in an extraordinary way. So I was taken to hospital. The police told my children I'd got a broken leg, but in fact people realised quite quickly that it wasn't that. It was a major injury because I was so debilitated. I think I lost half my weight as well.
That's a massive amount, isn't it?
So I had these huge compound fractures. I had a big gap in my shin bone. They were worried that it was going to necrotise. They didn't know whether they'd have to trim my leg off. But yeah, I'm just writing this story because it took me 14 years before I was ready to write about it.
Wow.
Throughout this time, while I was learning to walk again, which took about 10 years.
Goodness.
People were saying to me, you should write this story, it's a good story. And it is a good story. There are so many parts to it. For the purposes of talking about my business and why I'm working the way I'm now, which is called Indestructible Health, I looked at why I'd made such a good recovery. And what I realised was it was what I'd been doing beforehand led to my super health, or whatever you want to call it, and meant that not only did I survive the impact, because they didn't think I'd make it through the night. I was put in front of the nurse's station. Normally, if people lose more than 15% of their blood, they die. And I lost 4 pints, which is 50%. I'm not a big
Wow. So hang on. So normally if people lose 15%, they die, and you lost 50%, and you survived.
Absolutely. And I looked up why that might be. And the reason that I understand now is because normally you die of toxicity, because when you lose a lot of blood, the major organs shut down, like the liver and the kidneys. They divert the blood to the brain to keep it alive because it's more important. But that means that your blood doesn't get cleaned. So from the normal everyday process of digestion and breakdown of cells that are no longer functioning and all that stuff, you produce toxins in the body which the kidneys dispose of. And I wasn't able to do that. I had to cope with whatever toxins were in my blood because my blood was being diverted to my brain. It was a weird experience. I'd just describe it. It was, when your computer doesn't work properly because it hasn't got enough RAM.
Yeah.
And it tells you need to close a certain application if you want to use another one.
All the time.
That's how my brain was functioning for 6 weeks. I couldn't read for 6 weeks.
Really?
Yeah. Very interesting from an objective point of view. Yeah. But then the other things that happened, I had a breathing session on day 3. And in my breathing session, which was a conscious one, not just connecting my breath to cope, I had the experience of my leg being whole and perfect again, which was an incredibly psychologically healing moment for me. Because I have beautiful legs, they're my trademark. I don't ever wear jeans, I don't like trousers, I'm a skirt woman, I'm a leg woman, I like high-heeled ankle boots and short skirts, and that's been my trademark all my life. So that's been a big hardship for me in some ways. But to go on a little bit further, the other things that happened that made me realise I was doing something right, I had these huge skin grafts. They never take 100%. These skin graft guys stood at the foot of my bed waiting for me to explode. They all expect me to get an infection. Bear in mind, I had open wound 2/3 of my left calf, and I had open wound 2/3 of my right thigh.
God.
I didn't get any infection whatsoever.
That's incredible, isn't it?
And the people on the ward with me, I was moved to another hospital. I was moved to the specialist skin graft hospital. People there had infections. They were all on antibiotics. About half of them had infections, and their biggest wound was the size of my palm.
Wow.
And part of this, of course, was my diet. Part of it's because I was taking a lot of vitamin C. Part of it's because I was taking the homeopathic remedies. My homeopath came into the hospital to help me. I didn't tell the medics I was doing that. They were trying to give me all sorts of medicines that I didn't want and I didn't need. So, for example, painkillers. I kept arguing with them. It doesn't hurt as long as I sit still.
So you weren't in pain?
I wasn't in pain after the first 3 days. Morphine and oxygen the first day. Then I realised the oxygen was the thing that helped. But I wasn't allowed it after the first day because it's toxic if you have too much. We know that. So then I was left to my own devices and I realised it didn't hurt. Wow. It was a huge feeling. It was a big... I liken it to... If you've ever been in a big ship or a place where there's a big engine running, the whole fabric of the building or the vehicle shudders and vibrates with the pounding of the engine. I felt like that. Wow. I felt like that for weeks and weeks and weeks. It was as though everything was building as fast as it could, like a speeded up fast motion of a tree growing or something. It was an extraordinary sensation.
Wow.
So I had all these really incredible feedback from the medics. I mean, even at my year checkup, I went to a different doctor in a more local hospital, and he said to me, "What have you been putting on this?" And I said, nothing. It's what I eat. He didn't believe me.
Really?
He said, what you eat has no bearing on how your wound recovers. And I said, well, what does then? What does dictate how bones heal? And he said, painkillers and smoking stop bones from healing. And I thought, well, why do they keep trying to press me to take painkillers then?
So basically, I mean, what I'm hearing from, what you're saying is that because of your extremely good health leading up to your accident, so you said you drink water. Do you just drink water or do you drink other stuff?
Just drink water.
You just drink water. So you just drink water, you're vegan, you've been vegan for years, you do your breath work, and clearly very fit. And so what I find really interesting about that is that, whenever we're told to be healthy, we're told to be healthy, to avoid diabetes or heart attacks or, to kind of this preventative measure. But I've never, it's never really sort of registered in my head that actually if you're really healthy, just in case you get hit by a car, then, then you're more likely to survive or recover.
I know.
And actually, you're quite likely to be hit by a car, whether on a bike or a pedestrian. That's quite a strong likelihood of that happening, possibly more than maybe getting some big disease. And yet we're never really told that message. And it's quite interesting that I'd never really thought of, you're having good health is almost like an insurance, that if anything happens, this means that you'll survive as opposed to die.
I know, and survive very well. I'm fit, bouncy. My leg does not look normal, and it never will, but it works. And I'm so no longer sensitive about it, so I have bare legs. I just deal with it. But the joke is, when you say about preparation, two things. My grandmother always said, wear your best underwear in case you get knocked. And don't wear best underwear because they cut it off you. And I was wearing brand new underwear. That's by the by.
So now I just the bit that you didn't sort of talk about a bit more was that walking down the tunnel bit. You say you kind of maybe visited the other realm or whatever, or you died for a moment and decided to come back. Is there a little bit more that you can tell us about that?
Yeah, recently I've decided to revisit it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was. I'm not so much the vegan person now, or the raw food person now, because I've realised that that's the direction I went in. I was sitting in. The reason I'm telling you that is because I was sitting in a pop-up restaurant, which was a raw dinner. And I was very early. And because it wasn't a normal restaurant, because it was a pop-up restaurant, there was nobody there. There were two people in the kitchen who'd been preparing the meal because it was just a one-off. And there was just me, sitting there, sort of in the semi-darkness, looking out the window. And I don't know if you know that sometimes when you're in that place of reverie, things come to you. And it came to me that I could revisit that place. I could go back, I could re-experience it, and I could have a look around. So I did. And I went back and I realised that I could now go down that tunnel voluntarily. I could meet people, ask questions, see who's there. And then I could come back, and also I could sit in between. I could sit in between life and death, and I could see what's possible there. And then I realised that I could move in other directions. There isn't just one tunnel.
Oh.
Yeah. So, that's one of the things I did much more recently, just in the last 6 months or so.
Really?
Yeah. It's a very, very educational, very interesting place. And part of that, and part of my journey has been meeting people who have regular contact with family members who've died. Because although I've been interested in this sort of stuff, it's never been something that's been my personal experience.
So I guess the having this exposure or this experience of having had a near-death experience and then now being able to sort of revisit it at will gives you a really unique perspective on a subject that I think a lot of people really are fearful of and daren't touch. As almost a taboo. Death is never really discussed, and even when people have got some terminal illness, the people around them would, oh well, it's going to be all right. They try and do everything to try and it's going to be fine. You'll recover. as opposed to having the honest conversation that, you're dying and how does that feel? And I guess, you're able to maybe have a unique perspective on that kind of conversation.
That's right.
So do you find that are you attracting people that are dying? Is that what's going on? Or how do you come across, because you mentioned you work with a lot of people that are kind of approaching the end of their days. How does that work? Because I called you a death coach earlier, but you don't call yourself that. So
no.
How do you, how does all that come about?
Well, I guess part of it is once people have heard my story, I've had local articles in the local paper, so I can attract people who they know that I've dealt with death and so they can talk about it to me. That's really handy. And then in the past, even before my accident, I attracted people who wanted to die. And that was really about needing to entertain the idea that it was okay.
Okay. So do you mean suicidal people?
Well, suicidal, unhappy.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, suicidal as well, but mostly thinking of one woman in particular. Her husband had died. She didn't want to be here without him. And she came to me for a few sessions, not many, and she wanted my permission that it was okay to want to be with him. And I didn't know. She died of a heart attack a few weeks later.
Goodness.
I have no idea whether it was connected with the work we did or not. I can't. But one of the neighbours said to me, "Did you know she's died?" And I said, "No, she didn't tell me."
I'm just wondering.
And I didn't say, of course, that she'd come to me wanting to talk about the fact that she wanted to. Yeah. And then sometimes people who are really, really challenged and don't want to be here, and it's okay to talk through that stuff with them and to say, where would you like to be? How does it look? Does the place look that you've gone on to? And it brings peace to people.
And I guess also for those that maybe do know that they are dying, just to have somebody to hold their hand for the last few steps of the journey, so that they're not alone. Because I think so many people with the society that we're in now, that people are living longer and they're more disconnected from their families, and they might, geographically and also in other ways, that many people are dying alone, and that's, a terribly sad, tragic thing.
Yes.
So to have somebody like you to help them make peace with various aspects of their lives, I guess, what kind of things might you talk about in your sessions?
Well, mainly it's been about helping them to find peace with whatever happens.
With whatever happens in the future, as opposed to what they did in their lives.
Looking at what their options are, because if you feel that your only option is suicide, for example, if you entertain that idea, you can get a proper perspective on whether that's what you really want. If things are that bad, or whether you actually realise that there are more important things and that you've got connections here and there are people who will help you, and reaching out to the people that you love, because sometimes the early damage that's been done with people and their connections with their mother in particular, but early connections, has led them to believe that they aren't acceptable and that they aren't wanted. And we carry that through. We carry through our conclusions in our very, very early experiences all through our lives. I mean, I know, however much I'm told that I'm wanted in a relationship, there is a part of me that believes that I'm unacceptable. And I have to work on that. It's nobody's business but mine. And I went for my breathwork sessions, my rebirthing sessions, and all of the things that I learned were incredibly helpful for me.
So you mentioned the rebirthing and the rebirthing breathwork, which is the breathwork that you used to help you when you were in your moment of between realms, let's say.
Yes.
In terms of the rebirthing work, I understand that takes you back to that moment where we take our first breath, which is why it's called rebirthing. Is that right?
Well, it's a nickname. 80% of people do. They do remember their birth in some form, not necessarily visually as I did, Usually in the sense of the physical experience of going through the pressure, because that's the overwhelming feeling of birth for the baby is pressure. So we get squeezed, properly squeezed. And depending on what the environment is like and how happy our mother is and which way up she is and all of those things, we have an experience that's either really fruitful and energizing and empowering, or we have an experience that is frightening and stressful and close to death. You know, quite lots of people are close to death or believe they are when they're being born. So that's where some of this fear of death comes from. But the other thing, nobody told me, I've had 3 children, nobody told me the baby kicks its way out.
Really?
I haven't had any drugs during giving birth. That was my choice. And I never needed them because I was active and dynamic and moving and doing all the things I needed to do in labour. And it was a lovely experience. You know, it was hard work, very hard, but it was great. And 2 of my babies really pushed with their feet.
Really?
So thinking of the baby's perspective of when you're being born, the womb goes very hard, pushes the baby out. The baby can then push with its legs to get out.
Right.
And that's what they do. Of course they do.
Well, you would. If you were like going through a tunnel, you'd use your legs to push yourself along the floor, wouldn't you?
That's right.
Yeah.
And the womb is contracting to help you.
Yeah.
And it's contracting around your legs.
Yeah.
And one of the things that happens when people are in a breathwork session is that you often need to hold their feet and they feel the need to push with their feet.
Really?
Because in Western environment, the baby and the mother are the wrong way up for it to work properly because they're working against gravity rather than with it. If the mother is lying down, the baby's having to push itself uphill.
Yeah.
The womb is at an angle upwards if you're lying down on your back. Yeah. If you're upright, the baby is pushing itself head down. Yeah. So easier, much, much easier. It's going with the flow. So it doesn't feel as though it's being obstructed in the same way. There are all sorts of things happening around the baby at that time which make its experience a positive one. And it was a big deal. I remember the baby coming out and still kicking. Its little legs were going like a bicycle it was pedalling.
But going back to the idea that, so that when you're born, this idea that that some people might have a feeling, that closeness to death, maybe when they're born, that kind of stays with them, that they end up maybe finally wanting to resolve at some point later in their lives. I read some research recently as part of writing my book about fear-free childbirth, that there's even some research that suggests that some babies that are maybe unwanted by their mother, or that it was an accident or whatever, there may be constant thoughts by the mum that the baby isn't wanted, that these people grow into adults that end up wanting to end their lives because their mother didn't want them anyway, and it all started because of the thoughts the mother was having. Have you sort of come across anything like that? Yes, there is quite a lot of work on it.
The author Sondra Ray, she's American, and she's written a complete book. It's called Ideal Birth. It's a complete book about the thoughts and affirmations for different styles and types of birth, and the thoughts that the baby has about itself and its mother and life in general, and they're characteristic. So caesarean-born babies have certain types of thoughts and difficulties, like expecting people to bail them out and not being able to think for themselves about things.
Really?
Babies who were conceived when they weren't supposed to be are always sidling in and sidling out. I've observed it very, very well. Yes,
have you?
It's very clear. That's not a question at all.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, we even have sessions where we work on people's birth story, where they work on what they call their personal law, which is the conclusion the baby comes to. So either because of your conception and growth in the womb and the time, or bad timing, or because of the beliefs of your parents or your mother wanting a child of the opposite gender. One of the most classic things for me was witnessing a man who was a very dear and lovely person, and he was on one of the trainings I was on, telling us all that he was a flasher.
Okay.
Because his mother had wanted a girl and he needed everyone to know that he was a boy.
Right.
And I thought, oh my goodness, that makes sense.
Goodness.
You know, there's a story for everything. She dressed him in girls' clothes.
Right.
She denied the fact that she'd had a boy. Of course he was going to have to deal with that later.
And I guess maybe like those people that want to change sex and have the surgery, maybe that comes down to the fact that their mother wanted something else, maybe. No?
I don't know. I've had enough dealings with people who are transgender to know that normally there is a hormone, there is a genetic component, chromosome component. I'll get to that in a minute. But I don't know whether that's part of it. Who knows? Who knows how, the web of our reality is so closely plaited with the web of the other dimensions that just because we're in a three-dimensional world doesn't mean they don't exist because we can't see them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Goodness, I mean, I'm sitting here, my mind is well and truly blown. And we've talked about life, birth, death. I mean, we've kind of really done full circle here.
Yay!
It's absolutely fascinating. And I'm just wondering, I just want to go back to the death stuff because that's just, I don't think we talk enough about death. And I just wondered if you had any, if there was somebody listening maybe that had been thinking about death or even maybe those that are fearful of death. I think a lot of people are scared of dying, and certainly, I watched my mother die, and now having experienced that, my fears aren't around death itself, but the suffering that leads up to dying and the idea of having an excruciating illness. When I was in the hospice at night and I could hear all the other sort of cancer patients screaming that agony at night, and it's like, oh my goodness. And given the current laws that we have that prevent people in that state of not actually opting out early and having to just go through the agonising pain of dying a slow death, for me the fear is more about the suffering rather than the actual death moment. But for those people that that haven't lived what I've gone through, and certainly that might have that fear of death, what would you like to say to them?
It isn't the end.
It's just a pause before the next chapter.
Yeah.
It's just the interval.
Yeah. And if we don't learn how to really, truly enjoy ourselves this lifetime, we will carry through our belief with us and we'll do it all over again. So it's up to us to take and enjoy every moment and relish it. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a brilliant thought to end our chat because, absolutely, just take life by the scruff of the neck and make it what you want it to be. Life is too short. Well, thank you so much, Catherine, for coming on the Head Trash Show podcast and sharing your story and perspectives on life, death and everything in between and beyond.
Yeah.
It's been an absolute pleasure. It really, really has. Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking me, Alexia. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation that I had with Catherine Holland. There really was so much stuff there that gives you so much food for thought. What she was saying about being healthy and her ability to recover, and then her near-death experience, and then working with people that that are considering the options around death as well, also very interesting, as well as the birthing stuff, how people born with a C-section like to be bailed out. I find that, really, really interesting. There's just so much there that kind of really sort of blew my mind when I was chatting to her and has continued to sort of wrestle with my mind ever since. There's lots of good stuff there to think about. So I hope you found it as interesting as I did. Now, because she's just imparted so much sort of impactful and wow knowledge, but at the end of the podcast I completely forgot to ask her to share where you can find out more about her online. So if you want to find out more about Catherine Holland's work, then you can find her online at oxfordpainclinic.com. That's OXFORD, as in Oxford University, Pain Clinic, all one word, and that's where you can find out more about the work that she does right now and also her rebirthing work. She also has a number of books that are available about rebirthing and breathwork as well, and you can find out all about that on her website. So do check her out. She sounds absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure that there are going to be some people listening that think, my goodness, here's somebody that can really help me. I've been looking for somebody like this, and here they are. So please check her out. And if you have any questions or anything at all about today's show, if it's stimulated any ideas or any concerns that you might have about your own sort of head trash or things that are going on in your head that you think I might be able to help with, then do not hesitate to email me and let me know here at the Head Trash Show. You know where you can find me, hello@headtrash.co.uk, and I'll do my very best to get back to you. Until next time, bye for now.
Thanks for tuning in. You've just been listening to Alexia Leachman here on The Head Trash Show. If you enjoyed the show, she'd really appreciate you leaving a review on iTunes. And don't forget to pop over to www.headtrash.co.uk to get your copy of the free 5 Steps to Clearing Head Trash guide. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes for more strategies, tips and how-tos for clearing your head trash and reclaiming your headspace. Until next time.